Hello and welcome. I'm Mike Haley, the Chief Executive Officer at Cifas, the UK's leading fraud prevention service. I'm honoured to be hosting this special webinar during the UK's very first Romance Fraud Awareness Week. This week, I think, marks a kind of powerful moment in the fight against one of the most emotionally devastating, but also financially damaging crimes that we face today. I've always thought that romance fraud just isn't about stealing money. It's about stealing people's trust, and I think often steals their futures. Lives are turned upside down. I'm kind of really stunned that in the past year alone, um, fraudsters took over £106 million from victims, which was nearly a 20% increase on the year before. Um, uh, and that's stunning because of the amount of awareness there have been around these types of frauds. And although I think public awareness is growing, especially if you recall recent high-profile portrayals of victims, such as Netflix Love Con Revenge, which is just out the last couple of weeks, and the infamous Tinder swindler. Um, you'd think that there'd be so much more awareness, but there's clearly still so much still to be done. And that's why today we're going behind the scenes with experts who are leading the charge in trying to stop this fraud in its tracks. So joining me today, and thank you very much to our guests, are Lucia Stacey Harris, the Director of Member Protection at Match Group. And that's the company behind some of the world's biggest dating platforms. And maybe, Lucia, a little bit later, you can tell us what those platforms are. Also, Annya Burskys, Head of Fraud Operations at Nationwide. And they do an enormous amount of work and research around romance fraud. I think it's right to say, Anya, that Nationwide probably have the largest number of accounts in the UK, or the largest kind of reach, I think, of any organisation.
Of all
And
building societies, yeah.
of the builder societies. And last but not least, Laura Carter, head of fraud customer experience at Santander, and also a key member of their Break the Spell initiative, which I really want to ask you a bit more about later, Laura. And that's about helping protect people from manipulation and deception. So thank you all for being here. But before we dive into the conversation, I wanted to share the story of someone who know this crime all too well. Her name is Kirsty. She's 43, a mum and a business owner. But she met someone called Liam on an online dating site. But he led on to deceive her, manipulate her, and isolated Kirsty over a 6-month period, and ultimately stealing £90,000 from her. So let's just hear part of Kirsty's story now.
From from that turning point there when he asked me for my money, that's when everything started to shift. And that's how he was then. He was very, he'd be pushy. He'd be angry if I didn't do something right. But as soon as I did what he wanted me to do, he was all over me. I was fabulous. I was his queen, if you like. I'd done such an amazing job. I'd done this, I'd done that. I was such an amazing person. He loved me so much. He was going to give me such a fabulous life. We were going to do really well together. You know, he'd built up this life that I was going to be part of. And I, by this point, had sent nearly, by that point, in the middle, halfway through, we're looking at 50, 60,000 had gone. By the end of it, it was to the tune of 90,000, really. I call it 85 to 90, because there was extras that I'd sent that I didn't even call into the banking, the bank account that I'd let it all go through. And I was just sat quiet. I couldn't actually understand what I felt. I couldn't even describe to you to this day the feeling that I felt. And I think you only feel it if you've ever been through it. And I went to bed and I woke up. I couldn't even get out of bed. And at this point, I had my sister ringing me saying, "You just need to get out of bed, Kirsty. It's one step at a time. Just get out of bed. Open the curtains. Walk to the window. Look outside. Go downstairs. She kept saying that. And then I woke up one day and I thought, right, I can't allow this to happen to anybody else because it's nearly killed me.
Well, I think you all agree that's an incredibly powerful story. It's incredibly powerful to hear a victim's story firsthand, and hats off to the courage for Kirsty for taking the step to say that that last point, not wanting it to happen to anybody else by sharing her story. I have some sort of reflections around that love bombing. I think that's a thing that I think Cecile Fjellhoy in the Tinder Swindler talks about. To start understanding how you can be emotionally attached, but that also the devastating impact. The depression and not wanting to face the world. I think that's powerful. So that's kind of my reflections. But I'd be really interested to start with your reflection. What really struck you most about Kirsty's story, and perhaps more broadly, how does it reflect the patterns? Is this typical or atypical of the type of things that you see? So maybe I can turn it to you first, Annya. What struck you most?
So I think for me, and it's always been the case with romance scams, is that you're not just losing your money, you're losing someone you think you love. It's not like
Mm,
any other scam where it's just purely material and it's money, a small amount, a large amount that you're losing. You're actually losing someone who you've built a connection with, that you've fallen in love with, that's made you feel good, that's perhaps helped you when you're in the midst of some sort of situational vulnerability. You might have lost a partner, you might have you might be lonely, you might be ill, and to then to lose that, as well as lose a boatload of cash, it's devastating. It is literally heartbreaking. And I think that's what really gets us about these sorts of scams, they are devastating. Okay, if you're a victim of an investment scam, that's one thing, right? You're going to lose a ton of funds, right? But to then lose someone who you've built a rapport with, a relationship with, someone who you've been messaging daily, you've been having video calls with, and for that to all be fake, then it's really, really hard. And we do a lot to support people who've been through that because it is devastating for them. And the thing with romance is it's the psychology that goes along with it. It's how they have at times isolated themselves from friends, from family, because they're so obsessed with this person they've spoken to. Everything's been done in secret. Their whole life has changed. So I think, Mike, for me, the overall piece here is that psychologically, romance scams are really damaging. They don't just damage your bank account; they break your heart. They can traumatize
mm.
you for a very, very long time.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that I think you could hear that heartbreak. I felt it. Just
Yeah.
it's the first time I'd heard that conversation that one of my staff had with a victim. But Laura, from your perspective, how does that resonate? What do you see maybe more broadly?
Yeah, I think the level of sophistication and the level of the amount of time they'll spend with these people is what's really concerning, because it's so hard to pedal back from that. They'll be manipulative, and they're really intense. And I think we saw it with Kirsty. They dedicate a lot of time to them, and so it's a really hard hill to get over, because as Annya said, the manipulation, the personal loss is there, as well as the financial loss, and it can be really difficult for people to admit it's happening to them, and that means it often goes on for much longer than perhaps they want it to, but certainly we would want it to. There's a really difficult, but I echo everything Annya said. The loss of that relationship actually can be much more upsetting for that person than the financial losses. It's almost like the death of a loved one, and it's then their grief period that they need to go in, because it's part of their lives that suddenly disappeared for them.
Mm. And Lucia, it's not always this way, but in this example, the kind of connection was first made on online dating site. Do victims also come to the online dating sites to talk about their stories and their experiences? I mean, do you actually, are you the first people to see it, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge how powerful and painful that story was. You know, I think that Kirsty's experience captures exactly what makes these scams so devastating because, like Anya and Lauren said, like these are not just financial crimes; they're emotional manipulations that basically dismantle a person's sense of reality and trust. And I think what stood out to me most about her story was the gradual control shift. And that's how these scams work. They don't start with a money ask, they start with connection, right? Like scammers use affection and consistency and emotional intimacy to build that trust. And then once that trust is deep enough, they introduce like urgency and secrecy and control and above all shame. So scammers really use shame as a weapon. It's something that victims carry deeply, and then it's something that scammers deliberately cultivate to keep them silent, which that silence then in turn protects the scammers. And that's why, you know, sharing stories like Kirsty's is so important because it really helps break that silence. Conversations like this help break that silence. And in doing that, I think we're, you know, collectively weakening one of the scammer's strongest lines of defense.
Yeah, thank you. Laura, I'm going to come back to you because that was a huge. We talk about the psychological damage, but £90,000, for most of us, is an awful lot of money. Is this? And I think this. We've done some research that it's around £11,000 average. I think I see Lloyd's Bank put out some research about between 5 and 9,000, depending on different age brackets. Is that the type of scale that we see, and how sophisticated do the scammers have to be to get that much money from someone?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, the values are obviously really changeable, and it depends on how much money I have versus the person, the next person that they speak to. But they quickly identify those emotional needs, and so it then once they're tapped into those, and perhaps some elements that they need more support with, maybe it's emotional, maybe it's something, someone might have something going wrong with their family, and they tap into those emotional needs, and then it's about how they can persuade them to support them, and what they're playing on is our good nature and our want to help other people. And so while it starts out as something for me, actually becomes something where I can help somebody else, and that feels really good for me. And so I think the value is really tricky because it depends on how much cash I've got available to me. But what I will do as someone who's in one of these cases is look to help, and that's what they really prey on. And I think it's hard to focus on value because what's important, what's a lot of money for one person is not a lot of money for somebody else. And actually it can be equally devastating to lose a couple of £1,000 to up to £100,000 for somebody else. I think what's really important is understanding that emotional impact and how they use that emotion and our goodwill and our trust of other people, and the want to help other people to then get to what they want, which is money.
Laura, you just reminded me something very powerful that I remember doing a TV interview when they asked me about what are fraudsters exploiting. And I said vices, vulnerabilities, and virtues. Our vices we know if the people want to, are gamblers or whatever. Vulnerabilities will have them, but virtue I think is really interesting. Is that an appeal to someone to help somebody here, appealing to our best nature to help someone, because I think that always is a part of the stories that are created, that Liam created with Kirsty, that suddenly then they've created that love, that emotional kind, and then you need to help me. It's like, well, when people think, how do you give money away? You're not giving money away. You're helping someone you love here. I think it's so it's a really important point.
And I think they, as a victim, I feel like I'm making a decision that's rational and reasonable because I've got no reason to suspect it's not. I would help somebody else that I know and care about, and so why wouldn't I help this person? And so that can make it really difficult for them to recognise what's happening, because it may look really obvious to people on the outside, but not for that individual at the time.
Yeah, I think that's another great point about the myth. Sometimes I'm dealing with such frauds that people are irrational. Actually, it's a very rational choice. I think that's a really good one to bring up. Annya, is the scale of fraud the same that you see, and how many victims do you see, and how much kind of do you see in terms of the losses?
So it's not the most popular of scam types by volume because they are slow burns, so they take a lot of time and a lot of investment from the scammers in terms of the effort they have to put in. But in terms of value, it is average loss per case is one of the highest values that we've got, just below investment scams. So low volume but high value and high impact, certainly for people that have been targeted.
Yeah, and I think to Laura's point, it's not actually so much about what the average is, but how much they can get from you, and they're trying to wipe you out. So if you've, and 90,000 is a lot of money, but I wouldn't want to say what I've got in the bank, but it's less than that. If they, and what if they took it all, it would be, everything. And I think it's whether it's 5,000 or 50,000, depending on your means. £5,000 could be someone's all their savings, and we know that, in society, people don't have a lot of savings, so that's probably a second devastation is the impact of but it's probably taking everything you have.
Well, and what we see is they don't just take everything you have, they'll encourage you to take what you don't have. So we'll see, as well as things like pensions and investments being cashed once sort of cash reserves are used up, people targeted will go after their family and friends and ask to borrow money. They'll take loans out. They'll try and just get money from anywhere they can. So sadly, we often find that people targeted are left in financial difficulties after these sorts of scams because they've used everything they can and more.
But that's another facet, isn't it? From going from losing what you've saved to actually getting into debt with friends, families, and with institutions as well. I mean, that's something to really kind of reflect on. So Lucia, I want to come back to kind of your role as a representing the dating platforms. And one of the kind of issues I think I kind of want to explore is that clearly, if I come onto a dating platform, I want my information to be private. Yeah, this is something between me, the platform, and people I might want to meet. So how do you balance that kind of requirement from your customers or your group's customers, and actually trying to do fraud prevention and be proactive?
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act, right? We're deeply invested in continuously building and earning trust, both between the users on our platforms and between users and our platforms. So on the privacy side, we don't want people, like you said, to feel surveilled or over-policed. And so to kind of combat that, we're just really clear and transparent in our terms of service about how we're using user data and what safety precautions we take to protect the community. So we set really clear expectations up front. I think that's critical. And we make a point of explaining not just what we're doing, but why. So whether it's using behavioral signals to detect suspicious accounts or asking users to verify their identity, we want users to understand our intentions and feel like they're part of the safety equation, not subject to it. So ultimately, we're guided by best practices in both privacy and safety, and we treat both as long-term commitments, not just, one-time check boxes.
Yeah, thank you. Annya, I mean, there's challenges that Lucia and the industry face in terms of protecting people on their platforms, which are abused by scammers, identifying them coming on, but then also trying to find those signals for when something is going wrong. From a bank's perspective, I think there's also what are the challenges, particularly about real-time fraud prevention, because I think in the industry we talk about people being in a hot state or being in a time when they're under the spell. I think Laura's thing is, so how do you go about that intervention in real time?
So breaking the spell on romance scams is hard. It's very, very challenging for my fraud prevention agents to convince people and convince our customers that the person they've been speaking to for a year, who they've had video calls with, who they know everything about, is actually a scammer. And as I said earlier, the scammer kind of after the love bombing, with all the affection, they kind of encourage the victim to almost isolate themselves from friends and family, not to trust anyone else. So if they don't trust their own friends and family, they're not going to trust someone who's calling them to have a chat about their payments. So, it takes a lot of skill and a lot of persuasion from my team to really talk to the customer and convince them that it's this is not genuine and that they're being scammed by somebody. Unfortunately, we do see, even post those conversations, some victims remaining unaccepting of the fact that they've been scammed. So we have to kind of take action on those accounts, unfortunately, including putting cautions on and blocks to stop any more funds leaving. So it takes quite a lot. It can take many calls, many different conversations. We need to be really credible and authoritative when we're having these conversations. We need to kind of get evidence from the customer and then try and prove to them that the evidence is fake. These photos are AI generated. Look at this, look at that. So it's some really tricky conversations. What we also have kind of difficulty with, which we do see sadly, is that sometimes we see the same people targeted again and again, sometimes by the same scammer. Some people are so vulnerable that they've been a victim once, they'll go back on a dating site, it will happen again. So there's quite a bit here we need to do around education, and we do that. But when someone is in a vulnerable position, and they are looking for love, that often overrides what their banks told them. So there's quite a few different nuances and complexities that go on with romance scams, which are tricky. I think getting customers to understand the red flags is hard, and sort of they don't want to hear it, they don't want to know, they want to be in denial. So again, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of hand holding to get customers on the journey and get them over the line believing what we say, and we often are successful. It can take quite a lot of time, and I think finally something that it has been emerging now, I say emerging over the last sort of year or so, is that we're seeing a lot more of the pig butchering type activity. So where it starts off as an investment scam, but then goes into romance because the person they're speaking to about the investment also now wants to have a relationship with them, or the other way round, where it starts as a romance scam, but then moves into investment. They're very complex, they're challenging. It's a convergence of two different scam types. And yeah, it's then, being able to break that spell with the customer and convince them that it's not legit. It's very tricky. It's very different to what fraud prevention used to be like 15 years ago, where it was very much a, did you make this payment? No, I didn't. Okay, we'll log it as a fraud case, crack on. Now it's an art almost, having that conversation.
Yeah, so Annya, you mentioned breaking the spell, and I'll come over to Laura about your break the spell program. But I'm glad that we got to, there have been successes. But I do think it seems that you're up against a year of someone coaching someone
Yes.
versus a smallish window to kind of build some trust to be able to explain someone. So Laura, tell us a bit more about the break the spell campaign. What does that involve, and what impact it's had?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, actually, Mike, because we get very limited time with the customer, and for them, I'm part of a bank, and that's to make a transaction. We're not here to necessarily, in their heads, give them that support and that understanding, and so they're here just to move money from A to B, and so that's a real challenge for us because it's a really short period of time. So we set the Break the Spell team up in 2021. We've got about 20 people on that team, although if I'm honest, most of the people who talk to our customers have an element of break the spell about them, because they have these conversations day in and day out. I think it's where it becomes more sophisticated, and perhaps the customers in more of a spell, that we will hand them over to this really specialist team. So they're a small team relatively. They've worked together for a long time, and they've got real highly trained, and we make sure they've got the real skill to have that empathy and understanding of the customers. because we know that this can be a really difficult conversation. And it can be quite upsetting for our colleagues actually sometimes, because particularly where they can see it and the customer's not convinced. And what we're trying to do is fight against those decisions that feel rational and reasonable to the individual. So for them, this isn't a problem. This is something that they're just doing. And we don't tell them they're being scammed, because I think if you say to someone, do you know this is a scam, actually the defense mechanism comes in then, and it's a natural thing, because actually, no, I'm not, thank you very much, I know exactly what I'm doing and I'm in control. And so instead we take our time, and it goes back to what Annya was saying, it's time, and it's supporting people to question the criminal rather than us as a bank. So we one of the really effective things we do is ask customers to talk to somebody else, so someone they do know and trust, someone in their family or a friend, and we know that can be really difficult because it's embarrassing, and a lot of the time I think, Lucia, you mentioned that they are encouraged to keep it a secret, and so it can be really hard to then say, actually, I'm in a relationship and actually this person's asking me to send them money. But we know that in lots of cases, once they are speaking to someone they know and trust, and they just talk it through, just explain, you don't tell them what we're telling you, tell them what's actually going on, explain to them this relationship and what's being asked of you, and then maybe seek their opinion, because you can trust that. And then often if that collaborates with ours, we're in a much better position. So while most of the time the team is speaking to customers on the phone, we've got other things we can do, and we've certainly spoken to customers in branch. We've got them face to face, and that sometimes is a much easier conversation, because you can have a conversation rather than a telephone call. So and then there's other tactics. So things like introducing reverse image search has been a really helpful one, because most people wouldn't have thought to do that. And actually, particularly with images being stolen off other people's Facebook, sites and things like that, that's a really effective way to say, and not tell them that it's happening, but instead let them see what it is. And then often people come to their own conclusions quite quickly. But it can take, as Annya said, weeks, months, and sometimes longer.
So I think there's some important lessons there. I think I was taking around having this, having a small skilled team that practiced in this and having these conversations. A word I picked up was empathy. I think also you might talk about 5, 10, 15 years ago. I think I saw it with law enforcement. I saw it in my own world, probably a lack of empathy for someone who's been a victim of a romance fraud, kind of unbelievability of that, and having that absolutely coming from the bank. And I love that thing around not challenging or not getting someone on the defensive, because no one wants to be said, oh, you've been scammed. I think because there's a lot. I think you mentioned, Lucia, about the shame, or the that's used as a tool to therefore not talk to anybody else. So I think there's some really important lessons there. I kind of move on now about what do we do about it. I will come to you first, Lucia, but and then to yourself, Lauren, and Annya, about do we see solutions emerging, technical ways or ways we just talked about in terms of campaigns, any particular collaborations, what would you highlight as being, the best kind of responses to this issue? To you first, Lucia.
Yeah, so one solution that we've been exploring is just-in-time interventions. So as part of joining the UK Online Fraud Charter, we now proactively notify users when they've matched with someone that we later determine to be a scammer. So for example, if a user in the UK has exchanged phone numbers with someone on our platform, and then we confirm that person to be a fraud actor, we'll send the person they sent their number to an email saying something like, hey, John, who you matched with earlier today, has been removed from the platform for potentially fraudulent activities. Here's what you need to know. Here are some next steps. And I'll say the results are mixed. In many cases, the scammers are already anticipating the warning, and they've kind of preemptively inoculated their targets. So they'll tell them to expect a message from us, and they'll frame it as a misunderstanding. But on some occasions, these notifications do cut through. So we've had users write back and say, I was already feeling some red flags, and this kind of confirmed it for me. And then, one case I'll highlight that was recent, a user emailed us a month after they received that email. And she said, I got this email a month ago. The guy I was talking to warned me that I might get the email, so I ignored it at the time. But then today my bank teller was giving me a really similar warning. And between these two things, something clicked. So even if the platform level notification doesn't work on its own, when it's combined with other interventions from banks, from awareness campaigns, from conversations with friends and family, I think it can tip the balance, and that's the key. If we're all adopting these similar best practices across sectors, even if we don't necessarily see, success in our own right on our own platform, if we're all doing it, we're increasing the chances that we break through that psychological hold and we can kind of collectively disrupt the scam together.
Yeah, I think that's probably the first time I've seen that as a real example, Lucia. When we talk about consistent messaging, I hear about two different organizations giving a consistent message and then the penny dropping, and also kind of building on someone's gut feeling. I often speak to scam victims who sometimes say, I felt at some stage something was wrong. And about trusting that, but reinforcing that, yes, you did. And I love it. Mixed with Laura's not make it put them on defense and saying, well, I think you've been scammed, but ask them to think about those. So from your perspective, Annya, from a bank's perspective, do we see technical measures as the future? Are there things that you're looking at that can help identify early scam victims, or is it about this kind of messaging and conversations like in Breaking the Spell? Where do you put your story in terms of how we go about to defeat this?
So I think it's a combination of all of those, to be honest. Sometimes it's the simplest things that work most effectively. And Laura mentioned earlier about the Google image search. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. It's really helpful. It's something customers can do themselves, people can do themselves, but it's also something our colleagues do when we're having the conversation, or investigating a case. So things like that, super easy, free, available to everyone. And the advice I'd give to anyone who is starting a relationship which has started online and is being asked for money, always just do your checks, and make sure that you are using things like Google or Ask Silver to make sure that anything suspicious out there or anything that doesn't quite add up can be verified and checked. From a nationwide perspective, we have the Scam Checker service as well that we offer to our customers, which is a free service, and that also enables a route in if people are suspicious. And look, if we make the wrong call on that and make the wrong decision, you automatically get your money back. So I think that is definitely a piece of kit that's very useful for our customers.
Excellent. And Laura, again to you, innovations, collaborations, what are the tools I think that you're hoping or working with to make a difference here?
I would love that there was a silver bullet for it, but I think it's a really complicated one. We have in time notifications, we have our payment warnings, and so we, as a customer's executing a payment, we'll talk to them about what's happening to them digitally or be that on the telephone. But unfortunately, I think with this particular type of scam, we're often really far down the chain. So it's not an off the cuff, I'd just like to buy that pair of trainers off Facebook Marketplace. We're often, as we said before, months or maybe even years down the chain. And so prevention is always going to be better. So if we can nip it before anyone sends any money, then we're in a brilliant situation. But I think these ones are often much more difficult to break in that moment. And so for me, education and awareness has to be the thing that we talk about, because I don't think there's going to be a technological solution that's going to come off the shelf that's going to make this happen for us. So that people can find help and support. I think it's really important we share as much information as we can. We need to take away any shame from this, because this is not someone being silly. I often hear that, they were silly, they shouldn't have done it. Why did they not know better? That's absolutely not the case. And so that shaming is really difficult then, because that makes customers less likely to want to talk about it. So we need to encourage conversation. We need to encourage awareness. We need to share as much as we can about it, to normalise it as much as possible, so that people are much more likely to come to us. When you said, Mike, earlier that they often have a suspicion, then that's the time where we want them to come to us, not later, when they've emotionally invested more and then financially also done the same. So I think we can help each other out like that.
I think it goes back to Anya's point about how fraud has changed, so that in our minds who have been in this industry a while, you look at technological, we thought about chip and pin at certain times on card not present fraud. And here it's not. And I agree with you, there's no silver bullet or a technological. There might be some indicators around behavioral things that we could look into, but I think it is all about conversation, asking people and providing information. And I think, webcasts like this, particularly that there might be victims or potential victims, or someone who just a member of the public who wants to join in, and then it just gets them to think, what's going on with me? Why am I not sharing what could be like one of the best things that happens in our lives, isn't it? When you meet someone who's special to you and you're special to them. Generally, you want to tell everyone, but here they're very much about don't tell. And there's all sorts of ruses. And I work on an oil rig. I'm a soldier overseas. There's some ways I can't meet you. I mean, there are certain stories that are repeated because the fraudsters are going from a script. And I think exposing what those scripts are, I think is important. So my last question to each of you is about, if someone is a victim, a loved one, or professionals, how can they find out more? What to support, tools, information available? Where would they go first? And where do I go first? I should have planned that. Annya.
So I mentioned earlier, if you're a nationwide customer, then you do have the scam checker service to help verify. But also you can visit our website, nationwide.co.uk, where there are fraud and scam related web pages, including information on romance scams. And actually, all banks and building societies will have very similar. So even if you're not a nationwide customer, just go to your own bank or building society's fraud and scam related web page. There is also victim support. So I know, so certainly from a nationwide perspective, we've partnered with victim support to provide customers free, non-judgmental, confidential support for as long as you need if you have been a victim of a scam, and especially something as devastating as a romance scam. And there are other sort of support things out there as well, including a website called Catch the Catfish, which was actually set up by the victim of a romance scam to help other people who have or are going through the same. So quite a lot of resource out there, but I would say definitely first point of call for free advice would be your bank or your building society.
Thank you, Annya. And to you, Lucia.
Yeah. So first, for education and prevention resources, including how to spot red flags, you can visit matchgroup-safety.com/resources. I believe there'll be a URL that's shared as part of this, but it's a great hub for kind of understanding how these scams work and how to protect yourself and others, and just generally how to navigate dating safely. And then if you need to report a scam, figure out where to do that, find support services, no matter where in the world you are, you can go to matchgroup.findahelpline.com. You'll enter your location, select scams from the dropdown, and we'll direct you to the appropriate reporting channels and support organizations near you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, Laura.
Well, I should probably mention our website too.
Yes, of course.
I'm conscious that
For your customers particularly, but any customer.
Particularly, I'm conscious that actually what we're doing is giving lots of different options. So, I mean, if you think you or someone you know, and I think that's really important too, because we've talked about how difficult it can be for individuals. I think, the first action is to stop sending money. I mean, that would be and then cut off communication. So just stop it there and then. I think report it to us or to your bank and building society and make sure they know, because that gives us the opportunity to reach out to the receiving account holders and make sure that maybe that we can stop someone else falling victim. So I think that's always really important. And then the police, I think, can be really supportive, particularly where someone's been so involved in it, and they can give them one-to-one support in many cases. But I also think that you don't forget you've got trusted family and friends that you can reach out to, and they can give you that emotional support. So yeah, I think it's tricky because there's no one source of anything. But victim support's a great resource too.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps one thing we really want to get across is that you're going to get a sympathetic ear from the banks or the police these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and victim support, and it's recognised as a crime. It's recognised as a highly impactful crime, and we want to help people through that process and hopefully try to get some of their money back as well. So before I want to wrap up, I just want to briefly mention a couple of things that Cifas is doing for its members to help them manage the romance fraud, but more broadly, victims of APP, authorized push payments fraud, the investment frauds, the type of frauds where these type of deceptive, manipulative social engineering is used. In that we have two services, one that we're just rolling out around what we call APP victim check service. And that's where we're bringing the data together about victims, because we know that from experience that they may come after your account in Nationwide. But if you also have a Santander account or you have a savings account of a building society, they will try to wipe you out at everyone. And sharing that information quickly to be able to know that you have someone who's a customer who's being victimized somewhere else, I think it helps you get ahead of the game. And we also know that around about 2/3 of people get re-victimized. So once they have been a victim of fraud, and that we call what's called the reload scam, where someone might be pretend to be a police officer, for example, or your bank saying that we're going to come back and get your money back, but now it's just getting into a different scam. I think, Annya, you mentioned earlier, the same person can get victimized by the same fraudster. So there's this APP victim check service we're bringing out to get a common defense and common, I'd say, cocooning around someone who's been a victim to make sure that they're not re-victimized. And secondly is the beneficiary check to enable our bank members to actually check on the destination of money and whether that account is actually under the control of the fraudster or has some indications that that might be a mule account. So, it is about collaboration, isn't it? It's about sharing these lessons. It's about doing a number of different interventions to be able to make an impact. Another thing, we're just hearing that the Financial Conduct Authority is set to release a study early October on firms and banks' responses to romance fraud. And I think we look forward to reading those findings and seeing what best practices there are. But kind of in closing, first of all, I want to thank our panel. I'd like to thank you, Lucia, Annya, and Laura. Thank you for your insight. Thank you also for your leadership and dedication, and your team's leadership and dedication for trying to protect victims. And more when it comes back to that Catch a Catfish or the Netflix type series and Anna Rowe and Cecilia Fjellholt, and here Kirsty, the power of victims coming forward and for their bravery, I'd say, to share their stories. I think that probably makes the biggest impact. And we're all working hard, but hearing from someone who's been through that. So I really want to thank Kirsty for her story. If you want to find out more about that, a whole story and listen to more of that interview, that's on the Cifas social media page. And not to add to the panoply of information, but there is a website for this week, Romance Fraud Awareness Week UK.org. That's a bit of a mouthful, but Romance Fraud Awareness Week UK, where a lot of this is brought together. And we will leave a slide on now with all the different resources for someone to choose. So yeah, for more information about this event, more information and accessing these critical resources to support, either to that website or take a picture of this last slide as it comes up. Thank you all for joining us. It's a really interesting conversation. It gave me some real confidence that you were actually making some impact. So we've heard about Kirsty's story, but we also heard about these interventions are actually helping people and stopping people. And I think, but that's protecting the victim. But also we need to give solidarity to those who are being victims, that we are empathetic through what they're going through. So do talk to us, talk to your bank, talk to your dating service, speak to your friends, family, because in the end, we did hear, didn't we, from Kirsty about how her sister was supportive, and you need those support when you go through such a trauma as a romance fraud. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.